Emily Carter and Linda Carter were the picture of a perfect mother-daughter duo, bright, respected, and untouchable in the quiet town of Maplewood. But one morning, Linda vanished without a trace, and the secrets hiding behind Emily's calm smile would shock a nation. What no one suspected was that the youngest woman in U.S. history to face the death penalty had been living a hidden life, one that would unravel everything her town thought it knew about innocence, family, and betrayal. Maplewood, Ohio, was the kind of town where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. People left their doors unlocked, neighbors borrowed sugar without asking, and gossip usually revolved around football scores or church bake sales. Among its quiet streets lived Emily Carter, a 19-year-old who seemed too perfect for the world around her. With soft blonde hair, clear blue eyes, and a voice that always carried kindness, Emily was the pride of Maplewood. Her parents, Tom and Linda Carter, ran a small diner at the corner of Main Street. They worked hard, smiled often, and built their lives around their daughter. From an early age, Emily stood out top of her class, captain of the debate team, and a regular volunteer at the local church. Teachers praised her dedication, and older folks adored her polite manners. On weekends, she helped at her parents' diner, serving coffee with a smile that brightened even the sleepiest morning. People often said she was destined for great things, maybe college in another state, maybe even a career helping others. Yet behind the soft smiles and kind gestures, there was something else, a quiet distance no one could name. Emily rarely talked about her feelings or her plans. Sometimes she would stare out of her bedroom window for hours, watching the woods behind the house sway in the wind. Her father once said she was just a thinker, lost in dreams of a bigger life. But Linda noticed the changes first, the cold replies, the secret phone calls, and the strange tension that grew between them. To everyone else, Emily Carter was still the perfect daughter. Only her mother sensed that something inside her was beginning to slip, something dark that no one could stop once it surfaced. The morning Linda Carter went missing began like any other. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of maple leaves and distant wood smoke. Tom left early to open the diner, and Emily said she would stop by later after her morning jog. Linda, known for her routine, usually went for a short walk around the neighborhood after breakfast. But that day, she never returned. By noon, her phone went unanswered, and her friends began to worry when she didn't show up at the diner, where she never missed a shift. At first, Tom thought she might have gone to visit her sister in the next town, but when he called, she hadn't seen or heard from Linda either. Hours turned into an uneasy night. Emily told the police her mother had left for a walk around 8 a.m., wearing her grey jacket and white sneakers. The officers noted how calm she seemed, almost too calm, as if the worry hadn't touched her the same way it touched everyone else. Search teams combed the surrounding woods, calling Linda's name into the wind. Flashlights swept over empty trails and quiet ponds. Volunteers from the diner brought coffee and sandwiches, praying for a miracle. Then, late that evening, a deputy found a single white sneaker near the creek that ran behind the Carter's property. It was caked with mud but unmistakably Linda's. Panic rippled through Maplewood. Flyers went up on every lamppost, news stations arrived, and reporters stood outside the diner asking questions no one could answer. For the first time, the perfect image of the Carter family began to crack. What had happened to Linda Carter between her morning walk and that lonely creek was something the town would never forget. 3 long weeks passed before there was any sign of Linda Carter. The town's hope had begun to fade, replaced by uneasy silence. Then, one cold November morning, a hunter wandering through the woods 10 miles outside Maplewood noticed something unusual, a patch of freshly disturbed soil beneath a cluster of pines. When he dug a little with a stick, a corner of blue fabric appeared. Police were called immediately, and within hours the area was crawling with investigators. Under that thin layer of dirt lay the body of Linda Carter, wrapped in what looked like an old bedsheet. Her wedding ring was still on her finger. The news hit Maplewood like a thunderclap. The town that had once prayed for Linda's safe return now gathered outside the diner in tears and disbelief. Tom Carter broke down when police confirmed it was his wife. But what truly unsettled everyone was the way Emily reacted. She didn't cry or collapse. She stood still, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the ground as if she already knew what they were going to find. The blue bedsheet became the first major clue. Investigators traced it to a store that had stopped selling that pattern years ago, except Tom had bought the exact same set for their house. That discovery led detectives to search the Carter home. They found nothing obvious, but one officer quietly noted faint drag marks behind the garage, half hidden by fallen leaves. Suspicion began to shift from an unknown attacker to someone inside the house. Emily's strange calmness, her distance, and the tiny scratches along her wrist became details no one could ignore. For the first time, people began to whisper that maybe Maplewood's perfect daughter wasn't as innocent as she seemed. The search of the Carter home grew more intense as detectives dug deeper into every corner. What began as a standard investigation quickly turned into something far more unsettling. While combing through Emily's room, an officer noticed a loose panel behind her dresser. Inside was a small, spiral notebook with a black cover, plain, unmarked, and dusty. When they opened it, the pages were filled with disturbing thoughts written in Emily's neat handwriting. Some were strange reflections about death, while others described dreams of her mother finally being gone and how freedom would come soon. The entries spanned months, showing that whatever had been brewing inside her wasn't sudden. Then came the forensic results. Under Linda Carter's fingernails, investigators found traces of skin and blood belonging to Emily. That meant there had been a struggle, one violent enough for Linda to fight back. When the police questioned Emily about it, she claimed the scratches were from her cat, but the Carters hadn't owned a pet in years. Her explanation fell apart instantly, and the calm mask she wore began to slip. The police also discovered small traces of soil on Emily's car tires that matched the area where Linda's body had been buried. The evidence was stacking up fast, and each new finding painted Emily not as a grieving daughter, but as someone desperately hiding something. Detectives began to suspect that her mother's death wasn't an accident or a random attack, it was planned. The sweet, quiet girl the town had adored now appeared calculating and cold. Still, no one could understand why she would do it. What could drive someone like Emily Carter to destroy the one person who loved her most? As the investigation continued, police began to dig into Emily's life beyond Maplewood. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Her school records were spotless, her extracurricular activities impressive, and her social media profiles innocent. But hidden beneath the surface, a secret world emerged. Using fake usernames, Emily had been active on online forums, discussing methods to cover up crimes, avoid detection, and manipulate evidence. She had researched poisons, forensic loopholes, and even ways to stage accidents. The depth of her planning shocked the detectives. She wasn't acting impulsively. She had been preparing for months. The real breakthrough came when authorities discovered her relationship with Dr. Marcus Hale, a college professor more than twice her age. Their emails and messages suggested secrecy and obsession. Emily had confided in him about her frustrations at home, and investigators suspected he may have encouraged her darker thoughts. Some messages implied she felt trapped by her mother's rules and disapproval, and Marcus had subtly suggested ways to gain independence, though the exact nature of his influence remained unclear. Police also found that Emily had searched extensively about decomposition, burial, and criminal investigations. The combination of her notebook entries, her online activity, and these searches painted a chilling picture. This was a young woman who had been quietly planning a way to remove her mother from her life. For the first time, Maplewood's perception of Emily began to shift. She was no longer the perfect daughter but someone capable of manipulation and premeditation. People struggled to reconcile the sweet, smiling girl they knew with the meticulous, secretive individual the police had uncovered. It was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that the quietest towns sometimes hid the darkest secrets. The investigation reached a critical turning point when a close friend of Emily's decided to come forward. At first, she had stayed silent, dismissing comments Emily had made as teenage exaggeration. But under pressure from police, she revealed a chilling memory. Emily had once said she wanted to start over somewhere new, without anyone holding her back. At the time, it seemed like idle dreaming, but in light of Linda's death, it took on a much darker meaning. Detectives then turned to tracking Emily's movements on the night her mother disappeared. Security footage from a gas station just outside Maplewood captured her car passing by at 1:47 a.m., hours after she claimed to be home asleep. The grainy video showed a shadow in the passenger seat, something bulky and indistinct, moving unnaturally. Investigators suspected it could have been a wrapped body, though the evidence was circumstantial. The timing alone contradicted Emily's earlier statements, raising serious doubts about her version of events. Other small details began to fall into place. Tire tracks in the dirt near the creek matched Emily's car, and faint drag marks suggested someone had moved a heavy object. Police also found traces of soil and foliage on her shoes that matched the area where Linda's body was later discovered. Even her behavior during questioning was being analyzed. Experts noted her calm demeanor, the lack of visible grief, and her evasive answers. By this point, the case had taken on a sense of inevitability. The story of Maplewood's perfect daughter was unraveling before the public eye, replaced by an image of a young woman who had planned, executed, and hidden a crime in plain sight. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and everyone began to wonder, could someone so young truly be capable of such cold, calculated murder? The trial of Emily Carter became the center of national attention, turning Maplewood into a spectacle of media scrutiny. Courtrooms were packed with journalists, true crime enthusiasts, and local residents who had known her since childhood. The prosecution presented a case that was both meticulous and terrifying. They painted Emily as a young woman who had carefully orchestrated her mother's murder, using premeditation and manipulation to cover her tracks. They highlighted the notebook, the security footage, the soil on her shoes, and the DNA under Linda's fingernails. Each piece of evidence was presented like a puzzle revealing a chilling portrait of intent. The defense, meanwhile, argued that Emily had been a victim of intense emotional pressure and psychological manipulation. They described her as a young adult struggling with controlling parents and mental instability, claiming that she had been pushed to a breaking point. Psychologists testified that her apparent calmness could be a coping mechanism rather than evidence of guilt. They tried to shift the narrative from cold-blooded murder to a tragic lapse in judgment by a young mind overwhelmed by circumstance. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that the jury was skeptical of the defense's narrative. The combination of premeditated online research, the intimate knowledge of forensic details, and her secret relationship with Dr. Marcus Hale suggested a level of calculation that was difficult to ignore. Days of testimony painted Emily not as a conflicted teenager, but as someone capable of meticulous planning and deception. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom fell silent. Emily Carter was found guilty of first-degree murder. Then came the sentence that shocked everyone, death by lethal injection. At just 19, she became the youngest woman in United States history to receive the death penalty, forever etching her name into the annals of American true crime. In the years following her conviction, Emily Carter's life became one of isolation and strict routine. She was transferred to a maximum security facility, where visitors were limited and her interactions with other inmates carefully monitored. Reporters labeled her the Ice Queen of Maplewood, a nickname that followed her through every news cycle. Despite her notoriety, Emily rarely spoke to anyone about the crime or her feelings. Psychologists noted her silence as a form of self-preservation, a way to maintain control in a life where freedom had been completely stripped away. Prison life offered little distraction, but Emily found an unexpected outlet in art. She began to paint, creating airy portraits of faceless women, landscapes shrouded in mist, and dark, abstract images that seemed to reflect the turmoil inside her. Some of her work was sold through prison programs, and curiously, one painting later appeared in Dr. Marcus Hale's office. Authorities never confirmed how it got there, but its presence fueled speculation that Hale may have continued to exert influence over Emily, even from the outside. In the facility, Emily maintained a strict routine, reading, exercising, and writing in journals that were never shared. Staff described her as polite and cooperative, yet emotionally distant, almost as if she existed in her own world. Over time, she gained a reputation among inmates as someone sharp, observant, and calculating, traits that mirrored what the prosecution had described during her trial. Though years passed, Emily remained a figure of fascination. Media outlets revisited her case, debating her guilt and the influence of Dr. Hale. Public opinion was divided. Some saw her as a cold-blooded murderer, while others suspected manipulation by an older, controlling man. Through it all, Emily stayed silent, leaving the ultimate truth of her actions and her mind a mystery that continued to captivate those outside the prison walls. A decade after Emily Carter's conviction, the case took a shocking turn that sent ripples through the legal world. Advances in DNA testing allowed forensic experts to re-examine evidence from Linda Carter's murder. Using modern techniques, they discovered a partial male DNA profile beneath Linda's fingernails that had not been detectable with earlier methods. The profile did not match Emily, but it matched Dr. Marcus Hale, the college professor who had been secretly involved in her life. The revelation reignited speculation about the extent of Marcus Hale's influence over Emily. Investigators began to consider the possibility that he had manipulated her into committing or at least participating in the crime. Some experts argued that Emily might have been coerced, turning her from a calculating perpetrator into a pawn in someone else's deadly plan. The public was stunned. Could the youngest woman in U.S. history to receive a death sentence have been manipulated by the man she trusted most? Authorities moved quickly to arrest Marcus Hale, who had evaded suspicion for years despite his connection to Emily. However, before any trial could begin, he died in a mysterious car crash while traveling out of state. His death left a gaping hole in the investigation, ensuring that critical questions about his role would never be answered. The new DNA evidence, combined with his sudden death, created a cloud of uncertainty over Emily's case. Emily's appeals gained renewed attention as her legal team argued that she may have been unfairly sentenced while the true orchestrator of the crime remained free or had died before justice could be served. The story that had seemed straightforward for so many years now had layers of complexity, leaving the public to wonder how much of Emily's crime was her own doing and how much was the influence of a cunning and manipulative man. Maplewood's dark chapter had become even more tangled, blurring the line between guilt and victimhood. The night before Emily Carter's execution was quiet, almost eerily so. In the small, dimly lit cell, she sat alone at a metal table, her hands folded, her expression calm and unreadable. Guards described her demeanor as strangely peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos and media frenzy that had surrounded her life for years. She had refused visits from family, friends, and even a prison chaplain. Instead, she spent her final hours writing a short note in precise handwriting. You never really know who you are until they tell you what you've done. As dawn approached, the prison was tense with anticipation. Reporters, advocates, and law enforcement officers all gathered to witness the historic execution. Emily was led quietly through the sterile corridors, her steps steady and deliberate. She did not resist, and she did not speak, leaving everyone to wonder what thoughts passed through her mind in those final moments. Inside the execution chamber, the procedure began. Witnesses described her as pale but composed, almost detached from the reality of what was happening. Some noted a subtle serenity in her eyes, as if she had reached a final understanding of herself and the events that had led her here. While many debated her guilt, others wondered whether she had been a young woman manipulated by forces beyond her control, a pawn in a scheme orchestrated by someone far older and more cunning. When the procedure was complete, the room was silent. Emily Carter, at 19, became the youngest woman in U.S. history to be executed. Her story left Maplewood and the nation with more questions than answers. Some viewed her as a cold-blooded murderer, others as a victim of manipulation, but no one could deny the haunting complexity of her life and actions. Her name would be remembered not just for the crime she was convicted of, but for the dark mystery that would never fully be solved, a tale of innocence, manipulation, and the fine line between victim and perpetrator.